Representative Dan Goldman, Democrat from New York, just did something that should terrify every official in the Trump administration. He asked the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking ring to stand up. He asked them, one by one, whether the Department of Justice had met with them. None. He asked whether they had reached out to the DOJ to offer testimony. All of them. He asked whether the DOJ had denied or ignored them. All of them. He asked whether they were still willing to speak. All of them. Then he turned to Pam Bondi and said, "It looks like you have some more witnesses."
And despite the shameful and despicable efforts by Ms. Bondi and her department to intimidate you, how many of you are still willing to speak to the Department of Justice? All of them. Well, Ms. Bondi, it looks like you have some more witnesses
Gentleman's time has expired.
It was the most devastating moment of any Epstein hearing to date. A room full of survivors, a silent attorney general, and a question that could not be answered. Before that, Goldman had held up documents. An 86-page prosecution memo from the Southern District of New York, still redacted even for members of Congress. A draft indictment from Florida against Epstein's co-conspirators, still redacted. An email from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell with notes of statements Donald Trump made about his relationship with Epstein. Bondi called them privileged. Goldman said they are not. There is no attorney-client privilege between Epstein and Maxwell. There is no reason to hide them.
And it included notes of statements that Donald Trump made about his prior relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there is no reason for this to be hidden from the American people. There is no privilege, there is no attorney-client privilege, and I see you're checking with your staff, and I can assure you, staff, this is not under attorney-client privilege because it was sent from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell.
Bondi attacked Goldman's lawyering. She brought up his impeachment of Trump. She called him a failed prosecutor. She would not commit to releasing the documents. Then Goldman turned to the victim list, an email titled Epstein Victim List. 32 names. 1 redacted, 31 not. Someone looked at that email and decided to redact 1 name. They left the other 31 exposed. Goldman said, "That is clearly intentional to intimidate these survivors and victims." Bondi had no answer.
There is an email entitled Epstein Victim List. There are 32 names. 1 is redacted, 31 are not. So someone looked at it and decided to redact something. And I will tell you that that is clearly intentional to intimidate these survivors and victims.
Then came the survivors. They stood. They raised their hands. None had been contacted. All had been ignored. All were still willing to speak. The room was silent. Bondi did not respond. The chairman moved on. But the image lingers. The survivors are still waiting. The DOJ is still protecting. And the truth is still being withheld.
New York recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, I went over to the department yesterday for a couple of hours to review some of the unredacted materials. And I am looking forward to your detailed explanation for why you have withheld almost half of the documents, which is required by the bill. Now, obviously, there are 3 million documents, so I didn't get through much. But one thing I didn't see was the client list that you said you had on your desk a year ago. I did, however, find a couple of important documents. An 86-page prosecution memo from the Southern District of New York and a draft indictment from Florida against Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators. For reasons that I cannot understand nor are permitted by the bill, they were still redacted, even for members of Congress. So, Ms. Bondi, will you commit right here to immediately providing those 2 documents in unredacted form to members of Congress? Not a complicated question.
Well, I guess it is for you because you have a law degree and those are privileged.
Okay, they're not privileged, but we will discuss that later. I also found an email that I have right here from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell that was unredacted. and it included notes of statements that Donald Trump made about his prior relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there is no reason for this to be hidden from the American people. There is no privilege, there is no attorney-client privilege, and I see you're checking with your staff, and I can assure you, staff, this is not under attorney-client privilege because it was sent from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell. Will you commit to publicly providing the unredacted version of this so that the American people can understand the extent of Donald Trump's lies about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein?
You're about as good of a lawyer today as you were when you tried to impeach President Trump in 2016. Have you apologized for that in 2019?
So will you unredact this? Will you unredact this?
You were lead counsel on that. Privileged.
I'm asking you, will you unredact this?
Privileged.
Privileged, of course. I look forward to discussing this more. Now, these are obviously improper redactions.
And let me stop for a minute.
I'm talking.
No.
I'm
if they're
talking.
not privileged,
Quiet.
don't yell at me. If they're not
Mr. Chairman, would you stop the clock? This is on your time. It's not on Mr.
If they're
Goldman.
not
Even though
privileged,
you used your
if we review
improper
them and they're not-
redactions
you'll like my answer.
to
If we
continue
review
to
them and they're not
protect
privileged,
Donald
Time belongs to the
we
member.
will be happy to release them.
We'll
after
stop the
review.
clock. We'll stop the clock. Time belongs to the member. Go ahead.
Even though you used improper redactions to protect Donald Trump and other predators associated with Jeffrey Epstein, you did the exact opposite thing with the survivors and victims of this scheme. So their identification information was really the only thing required to be redacted, and it was not. And it's clear this was not a mistake. This was not by accident. This was not because you only had 30 days when you really used 75, and that doesn't even include all the hours last March that you were redacting it. But I'll tell you why it's clear it wasn't a mistake. There is an email entitled Epstein Victim List. There are 32 names. One is redacted, 31 are not. So someone looked at it and decided to redact something. And I will tell you that that is clearly intentional to intimidate these survivors and victims. Now, in an interview last week,
How will you tell me that's intentional?
in an interview last week, Deputy Attorney General Todd
You
Blanche
can't go off script.
said that any victim that wants to speak with the department has done so, hopefully. Well, thanks to the incredibly brave people sitting here behind you, we can actually ask them if that's true. Now, would the survivors and victims who are here please stand up one more time? Just by show of hands, how many of you or your loved ones actually have met with the Department of Justice and provided testimony and estimate and evidence? None. And of those of you who have not met, which is everyone, how many of you have reached out either individually or through a lawyer or representative to offer to provide testimony and evidence? All of them. And of those of you, all of you who have reached out, how many of you were denied or ignored by the Department of Justice? All of them. And despite the shameful and despicable efforts by Ms. Bondi and her department to intimidate you, how many of you are still willing to speak to the Department of Justice? All of them. Well, Ms. Bondi, it looks like you have some more witnesses
Gentleman's
to
time has
talk
expired.
to, and I yield back.
We will go to the good gentleman from North Carolina, Congressman Knott.
Thank
May
you.
I have a moment, Congressman?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Here we go. Here's the photograph. This is why he wanted to repeat everything that had been said previously on Epstein. This is his state, New York. You probably don't even know who this is. Wahid Mohammed from Afghanistan.
Yes, because I'm no longer a prosecutor.
Convicted of assault. Wow, he represents New York. Wow, yet he doesn't care about the illegal aliens convicted of crimes. Assault and homicide. No longer a prosecutor, so he doesn't care about his constituents. Here we go. Arson, El Salvador, Miguel Palacios. Fermin Flores Ramales, Mexico, rape.
Let's talk about the 70% of immigrants who are detained without a criminal conviction or arrest.
Stop the clock. Stop the clock. Time belongs to Congressman Knott.
There is a moment in this hearing that should haunt Pam Bondi for the rest of her career, And it is not Goldman's questions. It is the silence. The survivors stood. They raised their hands. None had met with the DOJ. All had reached out. All had been denied or ignored. All were still willing to speak. And Bondi sat there. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She did not promise to meet with them. She sat silent. Then, when the chairman moved on, she attacked. She held up a photograph of a convicted criminal from New York. She listed crimes committed by immigrants. She tried to change the subject from Epstein to immigration. It was a deflection, a non sequitur, a desperate attempt to avoid the fact that she has failed the survivors. Goldman started with the documents. An 86-page prosecution memo from the Southern District of New York, still redacted. A draft indictment from Florida against Epstein's co-conspirators, still redacted. An email from Epstein to Maxwell with notes of Trump's statements about his relationship with Epstein. Bondi called them privileged. She said they are privileged. But there is no privilege between Epstein and Maxwell. There is no attorney-client relationship. There is no national security classification. There is no reason to hide them except to protect powerful men. Bondi attacked Goldman. She said he was as good a lawyer as he was when he tried to impeach Trump. She asked if he had apologized. She dodged the question. She refused to commit to releasing the documents. Then Goldman turned to the victim list, an email titled, Epstein Victim List, 32 names, 1 redacted, 31 not. Someone looked at that email. Someone decided to redact 1 name. They left the other 31 exposed. Goldman said, that is clearly intentional to intimidate these survivors and victims. It is a devastating accusation. It is not speculation. It is evidence. The DOJ had the list. They had the obligation to redact victims' names. They redacted 1. They left 31. That is not incompetence. That is malice. Then Goldman asked the survivors to stand. The room watched as women who had been trafficked as children raised their hands. None had met with the DOJ. All had reached out. All had been denied or ignored. All were still willing to speak. The contrast could not be starker. The DOJ spent months redacting the names of co-conspirators, Les Wexner, Donald Trump. They protected the powerful. They ignored the victims. They refused to meet with the very people they were supposed to be serving. Goldman said, "It looks like you have some more witnesses." He yielded. The chairman called on the next member. Bondi then launched into a tirade about immigration. She held up a photograph of a convicted criminal. She listed crimes. She attacked Goldman's constituents. She did not mention Epstein. She did not mention the survivors. She did not mention the documents. She deflected. She changed the subject. She hoped no one would notice. But the survivors were still standing. The documents were still redacted. The questions were still unanswered. Bondi says she will be happy to release the documents. But she has not. She says victims should come forward. But when they do, she ignores them. She says she follows the law. But the law required her to redact victims' names. She did not. The law required her to release the files. She withheld half. The law required her to protect the survivors. She exposed them. Goldman's time was brief, but his impact was lasting. He showed the room what the Epstein cover-up looks like. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is an email with 32 names, 31 unredacted. It is a prosecution memo withheld from Congress. It is a room full of survivors who have been ignored by the Department of Justice. And it is an attorney general who, when confronted with the evidence, changes the subject.